Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it's something different because I'll be talking about this camera right here. I know I made a video about this camera like 3 or 4 years ago, and in that video I was pretty neutral, like in terms of like I didn't really like it, but I also didn't really hate it. It's something like, yeah, it's always a nice camera to really have in my bag, but over the past few years I really grown to really love this lens and this camera and its lens, of course, and really took it to many places to travel and also for some of the professional shoots with me. So I think it deserves another video, and yes, this is the original LX100 that I have, not the Mark II or anything. So yeah, I still love it. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So I would first like to talk about the usability, operational side of things, the ergonomics and everything, pros and cons, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and then I'll move into the image quality for both video and photography side of things, and then just pretty much wraps up my conclusion. So it's just mainly still subjective because it's based on how I shoot, how I feel about using this camera. So I'm not talking or stating anything as like, you know, a photographer representing everything. I'm just talking about my personal view, experience, things like that. So without further ado, I would like to first start with the usability first and the ergonomics. So I really love how small this camera is and the fact that it's not really plasticky and everything. Even though it has a pretty huge lens for a compact camera, even for its price, I still find it's a pretty small form factor to have. Of course, I'm a person who usually uses like the X-T2, the Canon 5D series with L lenses, things like that. So for me, this is very, very small. The build quality though, even though it's really nice, I find that the certain buttons are actually really cramped together, such as the dial here. I find that it's kind of like I can easily just hit it, and then if I'm in photography or video mode, I can just accidentally hit the dial and it would just change certain settings that I don't want it to change, or just hit certain button. It's usually just back here. I know some people accidentally hit either of these buttons, which I have to admit I once or twice did that, but out of like 4 or 5 years that I have this camera now, 1 or twice hitting these buttons isn't really a big deal, but it's usually these buttons that I do hit. Another point to hit is the battery life. If you're using the original battery from Lumix, you'll find that it's not really reliable or accurate when it comes to representing its own battery life, because usually if you load it up to a full bar, the final, like the first bar is always going to last really long, and then after that bar is off, the rest of the bar doesn't last that long anymore. So you don't really get a precise guesstimate of how long the camera is going to last, even though if the battery's full or just half full, things like that. So there's that on the downside again. And another downside is this ring right here. I have it mapped to zoom because manual focus with this ring is a pain, and it's not precise at all. Even for zooming, it's not precise. So I rarely use this ring actually, and that's pretty much it about this negativity. Of course, I can nitpick on the viewfinder, but if they make it any bigger, then the camera will also be out of shape or a tiny bit bigger overall size. So I really like the form factor as it is. Oh, another downside is obviously it's just a nitpicking thing. I wish that this screen would actually tilt up and down so it would be easier for street photography, which is something I really use this a lot for, which is to get some random snaps for travel photography, things like that. I do occasionally use it for professional work, for some interior shots, or for some interview videos to get B-rolls, or as a B or C cam, things like that. And this is actually a really, really great camera, especially when it's using it as a B-roll camera or a time-lapse camera. This is a really great camera to have because it also shoots raw, like if you shoot time-lapse. So that's pretty good. But moving on to the good side, I really like the layout and everything. It's pretty good. I like the actual aperture dial here on the lens for compact. I really like that. Another thing that I really wish a lot of compact cameras would have is this aspect ratio control, because if you're shooting, like if you're switching between stills to time-lapse, you really don't want to go and fiddle into the menu and go for like, okay, change from 3:2 to 16:9, because I usually shoot 3:2 for my photos, and if I shoot time-lapse, I want it to be 16:9 to match the video aspect ratio, and I can just switch this. And of course, Panasonic, if you're coming from Canon or Nikon, which are really, like, they have really good organization with their menu system, you'll find that Panasonic's menu is hideous, to most politely describe it. Not as bad as Sony or Fuji, but it's still pretty bad. So yeah, you don't want to fiddle with that. But yeah, having that here is pretty nice. And I also like the fact that they actually leave the hot shoe here, because I can actually mount extra flash accessories like the transmitter, receiver, and everything. So it's pretty nice to have it there. Oh, another downside I don't like is the actual SD card compartment. Some Canon compact cameras actually have their SD card here and then their battery door here. Not all, but some does. So I think it would be nice to actually have an SD card door here, especially when this is kind of like a semi-professional compact camera. When the design is like this anyway, but then again, it's a compact camera, so I can't really complain that much. And for the price, definitely not. So yeah, there is that. Another downside to using this camera, especially for time-lapse shoots, for certain types of photography shoots, and also for certain types of like video use, is the fact that this lens here is like a zoom by wire lens, and it resets itself every time you, not only that when you turn on and off or when the camera stands by, but also if you're reviewing images or if you're just going into the menu, the lens retracts, obviously to protect itself. But if you're shooting like time-lapse, or if you're shooting certain type of photography where you want the exact same focal length to always remain, then if you're just reviewing your images for a few seconds or reviewing your time-lapse, whether or not you got that precise time-lapse that you want before starting a new time-lapse, or you have to redo the same time-lapse, then it's kind of like a little bit annoying sometimes. The lens just retracts or doesn't go back to where it was previously. So there's that. It always starts out at the widest point. So there's that to keep in mind if you want to use this camera for time-lapse or certain type of photography. So yeah, that's it. Another downside is actually the display. Now that I actually am looking at the display, is you can really scratch the display really easily. If this is your only camera, then I guess it's okay. But if you're really cramping in the camera bag like I usually do with my DSLR mirrorless, and then just cram this in, then the screen here actually scratches very easily. I actually noticed that compared to like my Fuji and Canon screens, where I also cram them together and the screen just doesn't really scratch that easily. But if you're really using this as one camera and just carry around and everything, then you're not going to scratch it as much as I would. And talking about the display is great. It's nice and bright in my opinion, but it's still a little bit too much glare at some point. And also a lot of times it will show moire when the moire isn't really there. A lot of times I would shoot video and then it shows a lot of moire, and I'm like, I'm only shooting a fence, and why is there so much moire? And then when I get back home, okay, the moire isn't really there. So sometimes it just gives you a little panic, but also sometimes the moire is actually there. So you cannot always think that, oh, there's moire, but is there really moire? So that sort of thing. But that's pretty much it for the pros and cons, what I like and what I don't like about the usability and the ergonomics of this camera, pretty much. Now onto the image quality side of things and the video side of things. Obviously this is just based on how I shoot, my experience using this camera, and it's more of a general kind of experience talk rather than like pixel peeping and things like that, because I'm not a guy who just pixel peeps and anything. So regarding the image quality, I really like the image quality out of this camera, although the skin tone, skin rendition is not so great, but at least this camera offers raw shooting capability. And when I do actually shoot a lot of portraits and skin tone with this camera, and I really like the fact that it does shoot raw, because in raw I at least can smoothen it out, like the color rendition and everything, versus the JPEG. The JPEG is still okay if you're only gonna post it on Instagram or Facebook, things like that, or do minor tweak like tweaking, but RAW really opens up a lot of capability for this camera to actually perform. So I really love the RAW files coming out of this camera. Of course, I hated the image quality from the G7, or in Germany, the G70. I really hate it. I guess it's also for the form factor of the G7, I expected a lot more in the same time, and for the price and everything. But then again, the image quality is very similar with the G7 or the G70, but it's not the same. And in my video 3 or 4 years ago, I actually showed samples side by side, things like that in my video, that the RAW files aren't actually the same, at least the way the camera processed the RAW files. And yeah, but having a compact camera that can actually shoot RAW and can do a lot of tweaking in post without showing too much noise is actually pretty great. Even though the details aren't really there, like you can have really nice and sharp images, optically sharp images, but the detail within the sharp areas isn't really there. Now, if you're shooting portraits, that could be great, especially only for social media use, where you don't need to blow it up to like a really big screen size monitor, where like, you know, Instagram or Facebook kind of thing, that type of quality, it could be great that you don't want to have every single wrinkle shown or every single pimple, like my face has a lot of pimples, things like that. Then this camera really does a nice job of rendering it out because it doesn't show that much detail. And it's not really about the resolution or anything, because there are other 12 megapixel cameras or even lower megapixel count cameras that will be able to capture more detail than this camera sensor can for some reason. And talking about detail, when autofocusing, this is a mixture of image quality and actually it's more of the usability now that I think about it. When you're autofocusing in low light, you'll find that the camera will try to hunt a lot because it couldn't separate between its own noise when using high ISO versus the actual subject. And a lot of times I find it between 45 to 50%, it will try to focus on its own noise and confirm that its own noise is in focus and not the actual subject. And the camera is actually determined that it's actually the subject, but you can clearly see that it's the actual noise that is in focus, the grain noise. But that is just, you know, nitpicking, because I also turn off AF assist lamp when shooting in low light because I don't like AF assist lamp. But yeah, now back into the image quality. The image quality, and if you're shooting like landscape, it's also fine, but if you're shooting a lot of golden hour, like sunrise, sunsets, things like that, you'll find that the flaring caused by the lens is actually rather distracting than pleasing. I like to include flare in my images when I think it's necessary or when I think it's nice to include it, but on this particular lens, it's more or less pretty distracting if the flare shows up. And there's also a lot of ghosting and you're losing a lot of contrast pointing into the direct sunlight. Now in video, because it shoots 4K at 12 megapixels, at 8 megapixels more or less, ultra 4K, then you're not going to notice it as much. And in video, it's actually where I really love this camera more, because it allows you to do so much. But if you're touching back at the usability again in video, this camera is designed to be a photography camera first. And when you hit the record button, which hits you into the video mode, sometimes the image will underexpose a lot or overexpose a lot because the video settings is really different. And what frustrates me is that there's no dedicated video mode, which you can see what you're gonna get before you press record. You know, sometimes you press record and then you have to adjust on the go. So best would be actually record a few seconds earlier before you're gonna actually record the actual action that's happening. Although that's not always the case, you know, especially if you're gonna vlog or things like that. And then just change the settings from there. That's pretty much the easiest way to actually do it. Or just leave it in like auto shutter or auto aperture, things like that. Of course, you're not getting the full manual control experience in that point, but it's still better than, you know, hit record and then suddenly the image just over or underexposed by a lot, and then you're just dealing with like bunch of over or underexposed clips. So yeah, there's that. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention as I'm twisting this now, it's back to usability again. Man, I really should start writing scripts. Anyway, you can add extra accessories on this mount by taking this ring off, but I haven't really added any extra mount on this yet. But yeah, and also in video, you like, this camera is not moire free or aliasing free, and you can still be tricked by the actual display showing a lot of moire effect, especially when you're shooting in 4K. But just keep in mind that there are actually a lot less moire to be seen in video mode as well. So yeah, there's that. So that's pretty much what I have to say about the photography side of things and the video side of things. Both pros and cons. The color depth is still not really there for photography. For video, you can get away with a lot of things for sure, but for photography, if you're into portraits and landscape, then of course this is very subjective, because I have my own personal preference on the color science, color depth, color rendition, and color reproduction, things like that. So yeah, with this camera, straight off the camera, I would have to edit quite a bit, but I still love the files coming out of this camera when edit with it nonetheless. And yeah, that's it for this image quality section and everything. Overall, I still think that this camera is a great camera, and nowadays you can get it for a really, really cheap price. And if you're starting out with compact, I would highly recommend this compact cameras. Of course, it's not the best compact camera in the world, but for like 200 euros, you can't really go wrong. It shoots really nice 4K. It does really, like, it shoots really nice image quality if you can live with the 12 megapixels though. The lens is really, really sharp despite the annoying flaring and ghosting oftentimes that it produces if you're shooting a lot into the direct bright sunlight. So yeah, there's that. Oh, another thing about this camera, especially with its sensor and the lens design, because it is not weather sealed, a lot of times if you're using this camera intensively, you will find dust particles on the sensor, and it's not like you can shake it off or have the image sensor cleaning kind of thing. It's just like you have to wait. Over time it will go off by itself. Maybe it could take a few days or a couple of weeks, but when it shows, it really shows, and it can be distracting, especially when using aperture like f8, f7, even f5.6, it will start showing. So yeah, there's that. But otherwise, I would really still highly recommend this camera if you are okay with the specs. But in terms of the image quality you're getting is still really, really nice. I actually also have vlogged with this camera for quite a few times. In fact, some of my earlier Berlin vlogs also were shot with this camera. Some of them were shot entirely with this camera, actually in 4K, so you can go and check that out on my channel, but that's a few years back. So yeah. And yeah, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. If you want a free photography guidebook, I have them for free on my website. It's absolutely for free. You don't need to give me your email address. You don't need to sign up for anything. I will not send you any newsletters or anything like that. It's absolutely for free. Links down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Have fun shooting. Stay safe. Bye for now.